Right after I gave birth, my husband decided to invite the whole family. Everyone congratulated us and gave us gifts, but for some reason my family wasn't happy. So my husband went to drop my in-laws off, and that's when my mother shouted, "My favorite daughter can't have children, so I will never accept your baby as part of this family." Then, in a fit of rage, she threw hot soup directly on my newborn baby's face. I grabbed my baby as she screamed in pain. My sister just smiled and said, "You deserved it for having what I can't." But then my husband's dad walked back and my mom froze in shock because my husband's dad was. I never expected my life to shatter on what should have been the happiest day of my existence. The fluorescent hospital lights still burned in my memory, along with the smell of antiseptic and fresh linens. My daughter, Emma, had arrived after 14 hours of labor, weighing 7 pounds and 3 ounces of absolute perfection. Her tiny fingers wrapped around mine while I counted each toe, marveling at the miracle my husband Derek and I had created. Derek practically bounced around the hospital room, snapping photos and texting everyone we knew. His enthusiasm was contagious, and I found myself grinning despite the exhaustion that pulled at every muscle in my body. He kissed my forehead and whispered that he wanted to celebrate properly with both our families present. At the time, I thought it was sweet. Looking back, I wish I had said no. The hospital room filled quickly that afternoon. Derek's parents, Richard and Susan, arrived first with an enormous teddy bear and a handmade baby blanket Susan had been crocheting for months. His sister, Michelle, brought a diaper bag stuffed with essentials and kept cooing over Emma's tiny nose. The energy in the room felt warm and celebratory, exactly what new parents dream about. My family arrived 20 minutes later. Mom walked in with my older sister, Vanessa, trailing behind her. Dad had supposedly been too busy with work to make it, which honestly didn't surprise me anymore. The temperature in the room seemed to drop the moment they crossed the threshold. Mom's smile looked plastic, stretched too tight across her face. Vanessa stood near the door with her arms crossed, staring at Emma like my baby had personally wronged her. Something felt wrong immediately. Mom approached the hospital bed and glanced down at Emma without really looking at her. She handed me a small gift bag containing a single onesie, nothing compared to the mountains of presents Derek's family had brought. I tried to brush off the disappointment, reminding myself that some people just weren't baby people. But Vanessa's expression haunted me. She stared at my daughter with something dark flickering behind her eyes. Hatred? Jealousy? I couldn't pin it down exactly, but whatever it was made my maternal instinct scream danger. I pulled Emma closer to my chest, suddenly protective in a way I'd never experienced before. Derek's family stayed for about an hour, filling the room with laughter and stories about Derek's own chaotic birth. Susan kept wiping happy tears from her eyes, and Richard couldn't stop taking photos. Michelle joked about already spoiling her new niece rotten. The contrast between Derek's family's joy and my family's cold detachment became impossible to ignore. Eventually, visiting hours started winding down. Richard mentioned needing to get back home to feed their dog, and Susan agreed reluctantly. Derek offered to walk them to their car, ever the dutiful son. Michelle decided to join them, leaving me alone in the hospital room with my mother and sister. The door had barely closed behind Derek when the atmosphere shifted violently. Mom's fake smile vanished like someone had flipped a switch. She moved closer to my bed, and Vanessa pushed off from where she'd been leaning against the wall. Both of them stared at Emma with expressions I'd never seen before. "You actually went through with it," Vanessa said, her voice dripping with venom. "You knew I've been trying for 3 years. You knew every single doctor's appointment, every failed treatment, every negative test. And you still did this." My brain struggled to process her words. Emma had been unplanned but deeply wanted once we discovered I was pregnant. Derek and I had been married for 2 years, and while we'd planned to wait a bit longer, life had other ideas. I'd been careful about how I'd announced my pregnancy to Vanessa, knowing about her fertility struggles. I'd been sensitive and supportive throughout my entire pregnancy. "Vanessa, I didn't do this to hurt you," I started, but she cut me off with a harsh laugh. "Everything you do hurts me," she spat. "You were always the pretty one, the one boys liked. You got married first even though I'm older. And now you have a baby while I get to explain to everyone why my body is defective." Mom placed a hand on Vanessa's shoulder, a gesture that looked comforting but carried a warning. I recognized that touch from childhood. It meant Vanessa was getting too worked up, revealing too much. Mom had spent my entire life managing Vanessa's emotions, smoothing over her outbursts, making excuses for her behavior. "Rachel, honey, you need to understand," Mom said, using that patronizing tone I'd heard countless times. "Vanessa is going through something you can't comprehend. This baby, as adorable as she might be, represents everything Vanessa wants but can't have. It's cruel of you to flaunt your fertility when your sister is suffering." The absurdity of her statement hit me like a physical blow. Flaunt my fertility? I'd gotten pregnant and given birth, like millions of women throughout human history. How was existing with my child flaunting anything? "Mom, I'm not flaunting anything. I had a baby." That's not an attack on Vanessa. "Everything is about you," Vanessa hissed. "Your perfect marriage, your perfect life, and now your perfect daughter. Well, guess what? I'm done pretending to be happy for you." The hatred in her voice made Emma stir against my chest. I rocked her gently, suddenly desperate for Derek to come back. Where was he? How long did it take to walk someone to their car? Mom stepped even closer, and I noticed she was carrying the thermos she brought. I'd assumed it contained coffee or tea for herself. She unscrewed the cap, and steam rose from the opening. The smell hit me then, chicken noodle soup, my childhood comfort food that Mom used to make when I was sick. You know, Rachel, I've always loved you, Mom said, her voice taking on a dreamy, disconnected quality. But Vanessa is my firstborn. My favorite. She needs me in ways you never have. You were always so independent, so self-sufficient. Vanessa requires more care, more attention, more love. Hearing my mother verbalize what I'd suspected my entire childhood should have hurt more. Instead, a strange numbness settled over me. All those times she'd chosen Vanessa over me, all those birthday parties where Vanessa got 2 cakes because she didn't like sharing attention, all those school events Mom missed because Vanessa needed her more. Finally, the truth was spoken aloud. My favorite daughter can't have children, Mom continued, her voice rising. So I will never accept your baby as part of this family. Time seemed to slow down. I watched Mom's arms swing up, the thermos tilting forward. Soup, hot, steaming soup, arced through the air toward Emma's tiny, defenseless face. Instinct took over. I twisted my body, trying to shield my newborn with everything I had. The scalding liquid hit Emma's cheek and forehead. Her scream pierced through me, a sound I'd never heard before, a sound that would haunt my nightmares forever. I grabbed her, pulling her against me, feeling the heat of the soup soaking through the hospital blanket. Emma's face turned bright red, her tiny mouth open in agony. Help! I screamed, pressing the nurse call button frantically while trying to assess the damage. Someone help my baby. Through Emma's cries and my own panic, I heard laughter. Vanessa stood there laughing, her head thrown back in genuine amusement. You deserved it for having what I can't, she said between giggles. Finally, something goes wrong in perfect Rachel's perfect life. Nurses rushed in, and everything became chaos. Someone took Emma from my arms while another nurse helped me out of the bed despite my protests. A doctor appeared, barking orders about cold water and burn assessment. My baby's screams filled the entire ward, and I couldn't reach her, couldn't comfort her, couldn't protect her from the pain my own mother had inflicted. Security arrived and ushered Mom and Vanessa toward the door. Mom didn't resist, didn't apologize, didn't show any remorse. She left without looking back, leaving only the thermos lying sideways on the floor, soup pooling across the linoleum. I managed to stumble after them, held up by a nurse, desperate to understand. Had that really just happened? Had my mother actually thrown hot soup at my infant daughter? The hallway felt endless, and my legs barely supported my weight. Derek burst through the stairwell door, his face pale. Rachel. What happened? Security just grabbed your mom and... He stopped mid-sentence. Behind him, walking at a slower pace, came Richard. Derek's father had apparently forgotten his phone and come back for it. Now Richard stood in the hospital corridor, staring at my mother with an expression I couldn't decipher. Recognition? Shock? Something else entirely? Mom froze. The color drained from her face as she locked eyes with Richard. Her mouth opened and closed, but no sounds emerged. Vanessa looked between them, confused by the sudden tension. Diane? Richard said, his voice barely above a whisper. Diane Patterson? Mom's maiden name. How did Derek's father know her maiden name? Richard, Mom breathed, and the way she said his name carried decades of history. I didn't know. Derek is your son? The puzzle pieces started clicking into place, though I couldn't see the full picture yet. Derek looked between his father and my mother, his confusion mirroring my own. Security officers still held Mom's arms, uncertain whether to continue escorting her out or wait for this bizarre reunion to conclude. You two know each other? Derek asked. Richard's jaw clenched. We were engaged. 35 years ago. She left me 3 days before the wedding. Took everything we'd saved together and disappeared. I spent months trying to find her, thinking something terrible had happened. Eventually, I assumed she decided she didn't want to marry me and had simply run away. The revelation crashed over all of us. Mom had been engaged to Derek's father? My mother-in-law, Susan, who'd been so kind and welcoming, was essentially Richard's second choice after Mom destroyed him. There were reasons, Mom said weakly, but Richard held up a hand. I don't care about your reasons. That was a lifetime ago, and I built a wonderful life without you. His eyes shifted to Emma, who was still screaming somewhere in my hospital room. But I do care that you just assaulted my granddaughter. My son's child. What kind of monster throws hot soup at a newborn baby? Mom flinched. Security started moving her toward the elevator again, and this time she didn't resist. Vanessa followed, shooting me one last poisonous glare before they disappeared around the corner. Derek pulled me into his arms, and I finally broke down. Sobs tore through me as everything crashed down at once, the attack on Emma, my mother's betrayal, Vanessa's cruelty, the shocking connection between our families. Derek held me up as my legs gave out, whispering reassurances I couldn't process. Richard approached us, his eyes wet. Rachel, I'm so sorry. If I'd known Diane was your mother, I would have warned you about her character. She's capable of terrible things when she doesn't get what she wants. The next few hours blurred together. Police arrived to take statements and photographs of Emma's burns. The doctor assured us the damage wasn't as severe as it could have been, first-degree burns that would heal without scarring, thanks to my quick reaction in trying to shield her. Still, seeing the angry red marks on my daughter's perfect skin made me want to scream. I filed a police report and requested a restraining order. Derek sat beside me the entire time, holding my hand, occasionally interjecting details I forgot. His parents stayed at the hospital until midnight, with Susan taking over Emma's care while I dealt with the legal aftermath of my mother's assault. The police arrested Mom that night. Vanessa wasn't charged since she hadn't physically attacked Emma, but her words had been recorded by hospital security cameras. Evidence of her celebrating child abuse wouldn't help her case if this went to trial. Derek and I took Emma home 2 days later. The burn marks had faded to pink patches, and the doctor promised they'd disappear completely within weeks. But the emotional scars felt permanent. Every time I looked at my daughter, I remembered that my own mother had tried to hurt her. Susan became a godsend during those first weeks. She'd stay with us during the day while Derek worked, helping with feedings and diaper changes while I tried to process everything. One afternoon, while Emma napped, Susan told me the full story of Richard and my mother. They'd met in college and fallen deeply in love. Richard had been studying business while Mom pursued nursing. They'd planned a small wedding, saved every penny they could, and dreamed about their future together. Then, 3 days before the wedding, Mom had cleaned out their joint savings account and vanished. Richard later discovered she'd left town with someone she'd been seeing on the side, some guy with connections who'd promised her a better life. Richard was devastated, Susan said softly. When we met 2 years later, he still had nightmares about her. It took years for him to trust me completely. Your mother broke something fundamental in him, and he had to rebuild himself from scratch. The irony stung. My mother-in-law had essentially picked up the pieces of the man my mother had destroyed, and now our families were permanently connected through Emma. The universe had a twisted sense of humor. Mom's trial started 8 months later. The prosecution had overwhelming evidence, hospital security footage showing her throwing the soup, witness statements from nurses and security guards, medical records documenting Emma's injuries, and my testimony detailing the verbal abuse that preceded the physical attack. Mom's lawyer tried arguing temporary insanity brought on by sympathy for Vanessa's infertility struggles. I sat in that courtroom and watched my mother show more emotion over facing consequences than she'd shown over hurting her granddaughter. She cried on the stand, talking about how difficult it was watching Vanessa suffer through failed fertility treatments. She painted herself as a devoted mother who'd snapped under the pressure of seeing her favorite daughter in pain. The prosecution tore that defense apart. They presented evidence of a pattern of favoritism and emotional abuse stretching back to my childhood. My old school counselor testified about meetings where she'd expressed concern about the differential treatment between Vanessa and me. Former neighbors described incidents where Mom had openly stated Vanessa was her favorite. Derek testified about the shocking lack of warmth Mom had shown toward Emma even before the attack. The jury deliberated for 4 hours. They found Mom guilty of felony child abuse and assault with a deadly weapon. The judge sentenced her to 6 years in prison, though she'd be eligible for parole after serving 4 years with good behavior. Vanessa attended every day of the trial, sitting in the gallery glaring at me like I'd somehow orchestrated Mom's downfall. After the sentencing, she cornered me outside the courthouse. Derek and Richard were nearby, giving me space while staying close enough to intervene if needed. "This is all your fault," Vanessa hissed. "You sent Mom to prison for one mistake. Family is supposed to forgive." Something inside me snapped. All the years of being second best, of watching Mom prioritize Vanessa's feelings over mine, of being told I was selfish for having basic needs, it all came pouring out. "Family is supposed to protect each other," I shot back. "Mom threw hot soup at a newborn baby. My baby. Your niece. And you laughed about it. You told me I deserved to watch my daughter suffer. So no, I don't forgive either of you. I'm done." Vanessa's face contorted with rage. "You always thought you were better than me. Well, guess what? You're not. You're just lucky. You got the easy life while I got the broken body. It's not fair. Life isn't fair, Vanessa. But that doesn't give you the right to wish harm on innocent babies. Get help." I walked away from her then, and I've never spoken to her since. Derek put his arm around me as we headed to the car, where Susan waited with Emma. My daughter had just started smiling, and seeing her face light up when I appeared made everything else fade into background noise. The weeks between Mom's sentencing and the civil lawsuit felt surreal. Derek went back to work after taking 2 weeks of paternity leave, leaving me alone with Emma during the days. Susan offered to stay with us, but I needed time to process everything without an audience, even a loving one. Emma's pediatrician appointments became my anchor to normalcy. Dr. Martinez examined the healing burn marks during our 2-week checkup and praised how well they were recovering. She asked gentle questions about my mental state, clearly aware of what had happened through the hospital grapevine. I appreciated her concern but assured her I was managing. Around 6 weeks, Emma started giving me real smiles, not just gas-related grimaces, but genuine responses to my voice and face. Those moments of connection helped pull me out of the fog of trauma, reminding me why fighting for her safety mattered so much. Managing felt like a generous term for what I was doing. I functioned. I fed Emma, changed her, rocked her to sleep, and went through all the motions of new motherhood. But underneath, I was drowning in questions that had no good answers. How had I missed the depth of Mom's toxicity? What signs had I ignored over the years? Could I have prevented this? Derek came home each evening to find me in the same spot on the couch, Emma asleep on my chest, my eyes unfocused and staring at nothing. He'd gently take our daughter, put her in the bassinet, and hold me while I cried. Some nights I didn't cry at all, which worried him more than the tears. My phone buzzed constantly with messages from people who'd heard about the incident. Some offered genuine support, but others felt more like vultures circling for gossip. Distant cousins I hadn't spoken to in years suddenly wanted to know every detail. Former high school acquaintances sent friend requests with messages full of fake concern and real curiosity. I deleted most of them without responding. The ones I did answer were brief and uninformative. Yes, Emma was fine. Yes, we were pressing charges. No, I didn't want to discuss it further. The boundary setting exhausted me, but it also felt empowering in a strange way. I was protecting my family's privacy, something Mom had never done for me growing up. One afternoon, Michelle stopped by with coffee and pastries from my favorite bakery. She didn't ask questions or offer platitudes. She just sat with me while Emma napped, drinking coffee in comfortable silence. After an hour, she squeezed my hand and said, "You're stronger than you know." I wanted to believe her, but strength felt like something other people possessed. I felt fragile, like a single wrong word or unexpected noise might shatter me completely. The social media aftermath proved brutal. Someone had leaked details about the incident to a local news station, and suddenly our private tragedy became public entertainment. The story spread online, with strangers debating whether I deserved what happened based on incomplete information and wild speculation. Some commenters blamed me for flaunting my baby around my infertile sister. Others criticized Mom but made excuses about mental health and stress. A disturbing number of people suggested that family members should forgive each other no matter what, that pressing charges against my own mother made me the real villain in this scenario. Derek wanted me to stay off social media entirely, and logically I knew he was right. But I couldn't stop reading the comments, searching for validation or understanding in the opinions of strangers who knew nothing about my life. Each cruel comment felt like a confirmation of fears I couldn't voice, that somehow this was my fault. My therapist, Dr. Chen, helped me recognize the pattern. I'd spent my entire childhood searching for proof that Mom loved me as much as she loved Vanessa. Now I was searching for proof that I deserved to protect my daughter from abuse. The common thread was my desperate need for external validation of my worth. You don't need permission to prioritize your child's safety, Dr. Chen said during one session. You don't need a jury of internet strangers to validate your trauma. What happened to Emma was wrong, objectively and absolutely. Your feelings about it are valid regardless of what anyone else thinks. Intellectually, I understood her point. Emotionally, I still checked those comment threads every night after Derek fell asleep, torturing myself with the opinions of people whose profiles featured cartoon characters and fake names. Richard started dropping by in the evenings after work. He'd bring dinner for Derek and me, hold Emma while we ate, and share stories about raising Derek and Michelle. His presence was quietly supportive, never intrusive or demanding. Sometimes he'd tell me about his broken engagement with Mom, filling in details Susan hadn't known or hadn't shared. Diane was different back then, Richard said one evening while rocking Emma. Or maybe I was too young and naive to see who she really was. She could be charming when it suited her, but there was always this undercurrent of manipulation. She'd twist situations to make herself the victim, even when she'd caused the problem. His description matched the mother I'd known growing up, but hearing it from someone who'd loved her before she became that person hit differently. Mom hadn't always been this way, or perhaps she had been and she'd just hidden it better when she was younger. Did you ever get closure? I asked. After she left, did you eventually understand why? Richard considered the question while Emma gripped his finger. Not really. I spent years trying to figure out what I'd done wrong, how I'd failed to be enough for her. Susan helped me realize I was asking the wrong questions. It wasn't about me being insufficient. It was about Diane being incapable of genuine commitment to anyone except herself. His words settled into my chest like stones, heavy but grounding. Mom's failure to love me properly hadn't been my fault. I hadn't been too independent or too needy, too successful or too ordinary. I'd just been her daughter, and she'd been incapable of the unconditional love that role required. The realization didn't erase the pain, but it shifted something fundamental in how I carried it. Dad's attempts at contact increased as Mom's trial date approached. He called daily, sent long emails explaining his perspective, and even showed up at our house once before Derek politely but firmly told him to leave until I was ready. His desperation felt like too little, too late, but part of me recognized the genuine remorse underneath. Susan suggested I at least read his emails, even if I wasn't ready to respond. So one night, after Emma went to sleep, I opened them all and read them in chronological order. The progression was striking. The first few emails were defensive, full of justifications and explanations. But as they continued, the tone shifted toward accountability and genuine regret. In the most recent one, Dad wrote about a conversation he'd had with his own therapist. He'd apparently started seeing someone after Mom's arrest, trying to understand his role in the family dysfunction. The therapist had asked him a simple question that had rocked his world: if you saw a stranger treating a child the way your wife treated Rachel, would you have stayed silent? Dad wrote that he'd realized the answer was no. He would have intervened, reported it, done something. But because it was his own family, he convinced himself that staying out of it was respect for Mom's parenting choices rather than cowardice enabling abuse. He'd failed me for decades, and he wanted the chance to do better, even though he knew he didn't deserve it. I showed the email to Derek, who'll read it silently before handing my phone back. What do you want to do? I don't know, I admitted. Part of me wants to tell him to leave us alone forever. But another part remembers being 8 years old and wishing so badly that he'd notice me, really see me. If he's genuinely changed, if he's actually willing to do the work, maybe Emma deserves to know her grandfather. This isn't about what Emma deserves, Derek said gently. She'll be fine either way. This is about what you need and what you're willing to risk emotionally. Don't make this decision based on obligation or guilt. His support meant everything. Derek had never pressured me toward forgiveness or pushed me to reconcile with my family. He'd simply stood beside me, supporting whatever choice I made, and that unwavering solidarity gave me the strength to set boundaries I'd never been able to enforce before. The civil lawsuit came next. My lawyer argued for damages covering Emma's medical expenses, my therapy costs, and pain and suffering. Mom had no real assets beyond the house she and Dad owned jointly. Dad, who'd finally shown up during the trial looking exhausted and beaten down, agreed to settle rather than fight. He sold the house, gave me half the proceeds, and filed for divorce. Dad reached out several times over the following year. He claimed he'd been so focused on his medical practice that he'd missed the severity of Mom's favoritism. He wanted a relationship with Emma, wanted to be a grandfather, wanted to make amends for decades of emotional absence. I considered his requests carefully. Emma deserved to know her maternal grandfather if he was genuinely committed to being present. We started with supervised visits, short meetings at parks or restaurants with Derek always present. Dad showed up consistently, bringing age-appropriate toys and asking questions about Emma's development. Slowly, cautiously, I allowed him more access to my life. He told me things I hadn't known. How Mom had manipulated him for years, using Vanessa's needs as justification for all her decisions. How she'd convinced him that I was fine without much attention because I was naturally independent. How she'd isolated him from his own parents and siblings to maintain complete control over their household. Dad had been as much a victim of Mom's manipulation as I'd been, though he owned his responsibility for being a passive participant in my childhood neglect. I should have stood up for you more, Dad said one afternoon while pushing Emma on a swing. I told myself you were strong enough to handle it, but that was just cowardice dressed up as faith in your resilience. You were a child. You needed me to fight for you. His apology felt genuine, accompanied by consistent action rather than empty promises. Emma adored him, calling him Papa and lighting up whenever he visited. I couldn't deny her a loving grandparent just because he failed me as a father. People could change, could grow, could learn from their mistakes. Vanessa, on the other hand, never changed. She sent me vicious messages through social media until I blocked her on every platform. She showed up at Emma's first birthday party uninvited, demanding to be let in because family should forgive. Security at the venue escorted her out while she screamed about how unfair life was. Through Dad, I learned that Vanessa had finally gotten pregnant through IVF. Part of me wanted to be happy for her, but the larger part remembered her laughing while Emma screamed in pain. I sent a brief congratulations text through Dad and left it at that. Whatever happened in Vanessa's life no longer concerned me. Emma turned 5 last month. The burn marks from that horrible day had faded completely, leaving no physical trace of what happened. But I carry the emotional scars, the hypervigilance whenever strangers got too close to my daughter, the nightmares where I couldn't move fast enough to protect her. Therapy helped. Derek and I went to couples counseling to process the trauma together, and I saw an individual therapist to work through the complex feelings about my mother. Susan and Richard remained actively involved in Emma's life, proving that family wasn't just about blood but about who showed up consistently with love and support. Mom wrote letters from prison. I read the first few, hoping for genuine remorse or accountability. Instead, I found justifications and manipulation. She framed herself as the victim, claiming she'd been overwhelmed by emotion and hadn't meant to hurt Emma. She asked me to visit, to bring Emma, to give her another chance. I never responded. The restraining order would remain in effect for 3 years after her release, and I plan to renew it indefinitely. Some bridges, once burned, should stay ashes. Richard's revelation about his past with Mom had sparked interesting conversations in our family. Derek had grown up hearing vague stories about his dad's broken engagement, but never the full truth. Learning that his mother was essentially his father's second choice could have been devastating, but Susan handled it with grace. I always knew Richard had loved someone before me, Susan told us over Sunday dinner. But he chose me every single day of our marriage. He chose me when he proposed. He chose me when we had Derek and Michelle. He chose me through every hardship and celebration. The past is just context. Our life together is the actual story. Her perspective shifted something in me. Mom's betrayal of Richard decades ago had inadvertently led to Derek's existence, which led to Emma's existence. The worst thing Mom had done to Richard had somehow resulted in the best things in my life. I didn't believe in fate or destiny, but I could appreciate the strange way life connected seemingly random events into patterns. Emma started kindergarten this year. She's bright and funny, with Derek's easy laugh and my stubborn determination. She knows she has a grandmother in prison, though we've explained it in age-appropriate terms. She knows her Aunt Vanessa isn't safe to be around. But she's growing up surrounded by love from Derek, from me, from Susan and Richard, from Papa, from Derek's sister Michelle, and from the chosen family we've built. Sometimes I wonder if Mom understands what she destroyed. She chose Vanessa's temporary emotional comfort over a permanent relationship with me and my daughter. She chose violence over conversation. She chose to hurt an innocent baby rather than address her own issues with favoritism and manipulation. The answer came in a letter that arrived last week. Unlike her previous manipulative attempts at communication, this one felt different. Mom wrote that she'd been attending therapy in prison and had started to recognize patterns in her behavior. She acknowledged that she'd been wrong to favor Vanessa, wrong to dismiss my feelings, wrong to attack Emma. She didn't ask for forgiveness or try to justify her actions. She simply said she was sorry and hoped Emma was healthy and happy. I read the letter 3 times, looking for hidden manipulation, but found none. Maybe prison had finally forced Mom to confront herself. Maybe therapy had actually helped. Or maybe she'd just gotten better at manipulation. I couldn't tell, and honestly, it didn't matter anymore. I wrote back once, keeping it brief. I told her Emma was thriving, that I was happy, that Derek and I had built a beautiful life. I didn't offer forgiveness or promise future contact. I simply closed that chapter with information and nothing else. Derek found me on the back porch that evening, staring at the sunset while Emma played in the yard. He sat beside me and took my hand, not asking what I was thinking because he already knew. "You okay?" he asked. "Yeah," I said, and meant it. "I'm okay." Emma ran up then, her hands full of dandelions she'd picked for me. "Mommy, look. I made you flowers." I took the weeds disguised as flowers and pulled my daughter onto my lap. Derek wrapped his arms around both of us, and we watched the sun disappear below the horizon together. This moment, this simple, perfect moment, was what my mother had tried to destroy. But we'd survived. We'd healed. We built something beautiful from the ashes of that horrible day. The scars remained, physical and emotional, but they'd become part of our story rather than the defining chapter. Emma would grow up knowing she was loved fiercely and protected absolutely. She'd never wonder if she was anyone's favorite because she'd be everyone's priority equally. As for Mom and Vanessa, they'd made their choices. They'd chosen bitterness, jealousy, and violence over love, support, and family. Those choices had consequences, and I'd stopped carrying guilt for enforcing boundaries that protected my daughter. Richard and Susan's story had taught me something valuable. The past shaped us, but it didn't have to define us. Richard had been destroyed by my mother decades ago, yet he'd rebuilt himself into someone capable of tremendous love and support. He'd chosen Susan, chosen Derek, chosen Michelle, and now he'd chosen Emma and me. His past with Mom was just background noise to the symphony of the life he'd actually lived. I wanted that same thing for Emma. I wanted her to grow up knowing that difficult beginnings didn't dictate final destinations. That people who hurt us didn't get to control our stories. That sometimes the family we chose meant more than the family we were given. The settlement money from Dad sat in a college fund for Emma, untouched except for the therapy bills it covered. I considered refusing it entirely, not wanting anything from my parents, but my lawyer convinced me to think of it as restitution rather than a gift. Emma deserved that security, even if it came from a complicated source. The check arrived with a handwritten note from Dad. He'd written that he hoped the money could provide Emma with opportunities he failed to give me, not just financial ones, but the emotional security of knowing she was valued and protected. He asked for nothing in return, just expressed hope that someday I might let him try to be the grandfather Emma deserved. I put the note in a drawer and tried not to think about it. But it haunted me anyway, showing up in my thoughts at random moments. While changing Emma's diaper, I'd remember Dad teaching me to ride a bike before Mom decided Vanessa needed his attention more. While making dinner, I'd recall the way he used to make silly faces to cheer me up after particularly bad days at school. He hadn't always been absent. He just gradually faded into the background as Mom's manipulation tightened its grip. Derek found me crying in the nursery one night, Emma asleep in her crib while I stared at the mobile spinning above her. He sat beside me on the floor and waited until I could find words. "I'm angry at him," I said finally. "But I'm also angry at myself for wanting to forgive him. Does that make me weak? Does it mean I'm falling into the same pattern of accepting less than I deserve?" Derek considered this carefully before responding. "I think it means you're human. You're allowed to have complicated feelings about your father. Wanting a relationship with him doesn't erase his failures or mean you're excusing them. It just means you're capable of recognizing that people can be flawed and still worthy of connection, if they're genuinely willing to change. His words gave me permission to feel the full complexity of my emotions without judging myself for them. I didn't have to choose between complete forgiveness and total rejection. I could build something new with Dad, something based on present actions rather than past failures, while still acknowledging the hurt he caused. The first supervised visit with Dad happened at a park near our house 3 months after Mom's sentencing. Derek came with me, and Richard tagged along as additional support. Dad arrived early, sitting on a bench with a bag from a toy store, his hands shaking slightly as we approached. Emma was 6 months old by then, starting to recognize faces and respond to voices. Dad looked at her with such raw longing that I almost called the whole thing off. But then he looked at me, and I saw something I'd never seen before, genuine remorse mixed with desperate hope. "Thank you for this," he said quietly. "I know I don't deserve it." "You don't," I agreed, my voice steady despite my racing heart. "But Emma deserves to know if her grandfather can be someone safe and loving. So we're going to try this, slowly and with clear boundaries. If you overstep even once, this ends immediately." Dad nodded, accepting the terms without argument or defensiveness. Richard stood nearby, arms crossed, watching my father with a kind of protective intensity that made my chest tight with gratitude. This was what family was supposed to look like: people who showed up, who protected each other, who didn't make excuses for inexcusable behavior. The visit lasted 30 minutes. Dad held Emma gently, talked to her in soft tones, and showed her a stuffed elephant he bought. He didn't ask about Mom, didn't make excuses, didn't try to explain away the past. He simply focused on being present with his granddaughter, and when our time was up, he handed her back without protest. "Same time next week?" he asked hopefully. I glanced at Derek, who gave a subtle nod. "Same time next week," I confirmed. Dad's eyes filled with tears he didn't let fall. "I'll be here. I promise." He'd broken promises before, so I didn't let myself believe him completely. But he showed up the following week, and the week after that, and the week after that. Slowly, cautiously, I began to see evidence of genuine change. He started therapy and actually stayed with it. He joined a support group for parents who'd enabled abuse. He read books about breaking generational patterns and sent me thoughtful messages about what he was learning. It wasn't enough to erase the past, but it was something. And watching him with Emma, seeing the gentleness and attention he gave her that he'd never given me consistently, I felt both grief for what I'd missed and hope for what Emma would have. Michelle became an unexpected pillar of support during this process. She'd call me several times a week just to chat, never pushing for heavy conversations but always available when I needed to talk. One afternoon, she invited me to her apartment for lunch while Derek watched Emma. Over salads and iced tea, Michelle opened up about her own experiences with family complexity. Her maternal grandmother had been cruel to Susan, creating tension that had affected Michelle's childhood. She understood the difficulty of navigating relationships with flawed family members, the constant calculation of whether maintaining connection was worth the emotional cost. "The thing that helped me," Michelle said, "was realizing I could love my grandmother and still acknowledge she'd hurt my mom. Those two things didn't cancel each other out. I could have boundaries with her while still appreciating the parts of our relationship that were good. It's messy and complicated, but most real relationships are." Her perspective helped me see my situation with Dad more clearly. I didn't have to choose between complete forgiveness and total rejection. I could build something new while still honoring the hurt I'd experienced. I could let him be Emma's grandfather while maintaining firm boundaries about my own emotional exposure. The conversation shifted to lighter topics: Michelle's new job, her dating disasters, her plans to renovate her kitchen. The normalcy of it felt healing in a way I hadn't expected. We weren't just connected through trauma or family obligation. We were building an actual friendship, separate from everything else. As weeks turned into months, our family found a new rhythm. Susan and Richard remained constants in our lives, always available but never intrusive. Dad earned his place slowly through consistent action and genuine effort. Derek continued being the steady, supportive partner I'd needed through the darkest period of my life. And Emma grew and thrived, completely unaware of the drama surrounding her birth. Derek and I started talking about the future again, things we'd put on hold while dealing with the legal aftermath. We'd always planned to have multiple children, but the trauma of what happened to Emma made me hesitate. What if I couldn't protect another child? What if my judgment was fundamentally flawed? "Your judgment isn't flawed," Derek insisted one night after I voiced these fears. "You trusted your mother because children are wired to trust their parents. That's not a failing. It's human nature. And the moment you saw the real threat, you acted immediately to protect Emma. You literally put your body between her and harm. That's not poor judgment. That's heroic." His faith in me helped rebuild my faith in myself. We decided to wait until Emma was at least 3 before having another baby, giving ourselves time to fully process and heal. But knowing we were planning a future together, that we weren't letting Mom's actions dictate the size of our family, felt like reclaiming power she'd tried to take from us. The restraining order hearing happened on a cold Tuesday morning in November. Mom appeared via video from prison, her lawyer beside her on screen. She looked older, grayer, smaller somehow. I felt nothing looking at her, no anger, no sympathy, no connection at all. She'd become a stranger wearing my mother's face. Her lawyer argued that the restraining order was unnecessary, that my mother posed no threat to us from behind bars and would be monitored closely upon release. My lawyer countered with evidence of the letters Mom had sent, the manipulative language, the complete lack of genuine remorse in most of her communication. The judge granted the restraining order for 3 years post-release, with the possibility of renewal. Mom would not be allowed within 500 feet of me, Derek, Emma, or our home. She could not contact us directly or through third parties. Violation would result in immediate arrest. Watching her face on that screen as the judge read the order, I saw a flash of something, anger, maybe, or resentment. Her mask slipped for just a moment, revealing the person underneath. The supposedly remorseful letter she'd sent weeks earlier had been just another manipulation tactic, carefully crafted words designed to soften me up for an eventual appeal against the restraining order. I realized with absolute clarity that she still didn't understand what she'd done wrong. She thought she was the victim in this story, punished unfairly for one mistake made in defense of her favorite daughter. That moment of clarity brought unexpected peace. I'd spent months wondering if I was being too harsh, if I should be more forgiving, if cutting her off made me a bad person. But seeing that flash of rage on her face, I knew with certainty that maintaining distance was the only safe choice. She hadn't changed. She'd simply learned to hide better. After the hearing, Derek took me to our favorite restaurant for lunch. We sat in a booth near the back, sharing appetizers and talking about Emma's upcoming first birthday party. The conversation felt normal in a way it hadn't for months. We were healing, individually and together, building a life that honored our trauma without being defined by it. Derek kissed my temple and whispered, "I love you." Emma giggled and echoed, "Love you, Mommy." I held them both closer, these two people who'd become my entire world, and whispered back, "I love you both more than anything." The hospital room where everything had fallen apart was just a memory now, no more real than a nightmare that fades in daylight. This moment, this porch, this family, this was real. This was what mattered. This was what I'd fought to protect, and I'd do it again without hesitation. Mom's letter sat on my desk inside, already filed away in a folder I rarely opened. Someday, maybe Emma would want to read it. Maybe she'd want to understand the complicated history of her maternal family. But that would be her choice, her decision, her story to pursue or dismiss. For now, we had dandelions and sunsets and the kind of ordinary happiness that felt extraordinary after everything we'd been through. Derek started grilling burgers while Emma chased fireflies across the darkening lawn. I sat on the porch steps and watched them, my heart so full it almost hurt. This was my revenge, if you wanted to call it that. Not bitterness or retaliation, but this, building a life so full of love that hatred couldn't find room to breathe. Showing Emma that cycles of favoritism and abuse ended with conscious decisions to do better. Proving that victims didn't have to stay victims, that we could become survivors who thrived. The fireflies blinked like tiny stars falling to earth. Emma's laughter echoed across the yard. Derek looked up from the grill and smiled at me, that same smile that had made me fall in love with him 7 years ago. Everything that came before this moment had led us here, to this exact point, to this family, to this love. And standing there, watching my daughter chase magic while my husband cooked dinner, I realized I'd forgiven myself. For not seeing Mom's toxicity sooner. For exposing Emma to danger, however unintentionally. For every moment I'd questioned whether I should have handled things differently. I'd done the best I could with the information I had. I'd protected my daughter the moment I understood the threat. I'd enforced boundaries even when they hurt. I'd chosen Emma's safety over my mother's feelings, and I'd do it again every single time. That wasn't revenge. That was love in its purest, most powerful form. And it was more than enough.